Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Nature Hour. This is the third installment of our virtual lecture series, and we are so happy you've decided to spend the next hour with us. My name is Fritz Schroeder, and I'm the Vice President of the Lancaster Conservancy's Community Impact Department, and we've launched this series with the goal of bringing an assortment of local and regional experts directly to your home with presentations that help you better understand the Conservancy's work, like this evening's presentation, Rebuilding Biodiversity in Your Own Backyard. Our goal is to inspire, educate, and move people toward action. This is a series of lectures that will be taking place every other Wednesday evening from 6 to 7 p.m. through the end of July. In the coming weeks, you'll have the opportunity to learn about the measures to control spotted lanternfly and healing yourself through native plants. We will share all the details of these upcoming events at the end of the evening's presentation. You can also find more information on our website, lancasterconservancy.org, under upcoming events. We encourage you to pre-register. Tomorrow is the public launch of Lancaster Water Week, months in the making, which is taking place August 7 through 15 this year. During Lancaster Water Week, you'll have the opportunity to participate in multiple virtual lectures similar to this evening, and we encourage you to take action by signing up for the Water Week Pledge, which includes a free action pledge kit. Look for updates coming from us in the coming days. The format for tonight's lecture is a 40-minute presentation followed by a 15-minute Q&A. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to have them answered at the end of the presentation. And tonight, I'm joined by my two incredible colleagues from our Community Impact Department, Kelly Snavely, our Director of Marketing and Communications, and Faith DeJong, our Development and Annual Fund Coordinator. We're also very excited to have Lancaster Conservancy's President, Phil Wenger, with us this evening. I would like to invite Phil to say a few words.
Thank you, Fritz, for an opportunity to welcome everybody together. I wish we were outside, but our world has changed and we are doing as much as we can engaging with nature virtually. And so I'm excited that you took the time to come and join us tonight. Every one of these sessions, we have somebody new who joins us, so I give a thumbnail sketch of who we are. The Conservancy obviously is focused on protecting natural land. This is what we do. We protect, we acquire, we open to the public, and then we restore that land, focusing on ecosystem services like clean water and having appropriate forests without invasive plants. And over the years, we've acquired over 7,000 acres. Much of it in Lancaster County, but also in York County along the river. And I will tell you there's a nature preserve within 10 miles of every resident of Lancaster County. But for those of you who aren't from Lancaster County, we still welcome you because you can do nature anywhere. The loss of land in this community has become so intense. In Lancaster and York counties, we have over 1 million acres, and it is being destroyed. Parking lots, highways, new housing developments, and the like. And I will tell you that our 7,000 acres are just the tip of the iceberg, the little bit that we've been able to acquire and create habitat on. But our challenge is so much more than that. We have that 1 million acres that resides in our backyards, on our golf courses, all over the landscape. And tonight, I'm particularly excited to learn from Elise about what we can do in our own homes and in our own neighborhoods. And I'm just really excited. I first got to meet Elise when she was a teacher at Hand Middle School. And I will tell you that she took those kids and took an industrial little tract of woods about 1.5 acres behind that school, and she transformed it. And she was able to engage and entertain all of those kids. And I went down there and worked a couple days with her and learned so much. So tonight is very special, Elise. Welcome. I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Phil. The Conservancy is blessed with incredible corporate support, and tonight we want to recognize Turkey Hill Dairy, who is our presenting sponsor of Lancaster Water Week, and Clark Associates, who's our lead annual sponsor. Thank you, Turkey Hill Dairy and Clark Associates. And now I would like to introduce our presenting sponsor, presenter, Elyse Jurgen. Elyse is the owner of Waxwing EcoWorks. She is a community collaborator working to rebuild ecological literacy and biodiversity through hands-on ecological gardening experiences in Lancaster and York County. She is a certified Chesapeake Bay landscape professional and ecological permaculture designer, along with earning an ecological gardening certificate at Cuba Center. In addition to her ecological design skills, she has a master's degree in environmental education. Elise works alongside homeowners in a participatory approach with their gardening for wildlife needs, infusing educational opportunities during the design, installation, and management process. She invites homeowners to deeply engage with their land to maximize its potential in supporting dwindling bee, butterfly, and bird populations. Welcome, Elise.
Thank you, Fritz, for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to share with the Lancaster Conservancy community this evening. As Fritz said, my name is Elyse Jurgen, and I founded Waxwing EcoWorks with a mission to rebuild biodiversity in human spaces through hands-on ecological gardening experiences for all ages. I collaborate with homeowners and schools and even business properties. I typically teach in an interactive format in my classes, so I invite you to grab a notebook or some paper to capture some ideas, as I will pose some questions for you to think about thoughtfully about how you can begin to rewild the space in which you live. In our little introductory mini class, we will address two questions. First, why is it wise to rebuild biodiversity in my backyard? Why can't we just give that job just to the Conservancy? Secondly, how do we engage in the ecological gardening process? We'll cover a simple alliteration memory tool that will provide the basic framework for ecological gardening. And then we'll close with a few before and after photos of various waxwing projects that were completed in the last year just to inspire us to action. And at the end, Kelly will take some of your questions and hopefully we'll get to them, although you can always feel free to reach out to me. So let's get started with just jotting down or sharing with a friend or family member that you're with this evening about what you already know about ecological gardening and how to rebuild biodiversity in your home landscape. What background knowledge are you coming with? Also, just jot down what are some things you're seeking to learn in our short time together. And then any questions that you have, we can jot those down as you go, and then you can share them at the end and put them in the Q&A section at the bottom. So right now, I just invite you to take an uninterrupted minute to just write down or discuss with those of you nearby those first two columns. Just take 20 more seconds here to wrap up your conversation or whatever you're writing. All right, thank you so much for engaging in that way. We'll have a few more questions along the way so you can keep nice and engaged and learn along the way. So let's now review some of the key reasons why it is vital for people like you to be engaged in rebuilding biodiversity. The first reason is starkly visible in the concept of a food web, which is familiar to us from elementary and middle school. Through diversifying the native plants in our landscapes that have co-evolved with wildlife, we create more resilient ecosystems that are able to bounce back from natural disasters. We literally can design our spaces to become like little mini nature preserves that are strengthened when we create corridors within our neighborhoods and larger communities. I just want to give a quick shout out to the awesome work of the Conservancy's Community Wildlife Habitat Program in partnership with the National Wildlife Federation and facilitated by Linda Farrick. So what they do is really encourage the community to create a county-wide wildlife habitat of homes and schools and faith-based landscapes. When we diversify the native plant in our landscape, which is the basis of all of our food webs, we create ample opportunities for insects to thrive, which provides a buffet for breeding birds. In a 3-year research project conducted by the Smithsonian, it was clear that juicy protein and fat-rich caterpillars was key for supporting a clutch of Carolina chickadees in suburban neighborhoods. In fact, 5,000 insects are needed to support one clutch in a breeding season. That's pretty impressive. So simply put, the more native plants that are present for insects to munch and crunch on creates more opportunities for birds to thrive. It is clear, however, that that message hasn't fully resonated within the ethics of our society, although it is changing, and it is definitely encouraging to see that change. You may have seen that this recent publishing in the journal Science, where it was found that there has been a staggering 29% loss since the 1970s of our bird species. Anecdotally, from our own observations, we know this, but now there are hard scientific facts to prove that yesterday was actually the time for us to take action in rebuilding habitats for wildlife. So whether you're on the Save the Bird bandwagon or the Save the Bees bandwagon, or both like me, the good news is there's more awareness given to the concern over dwindling wildlife populations. Pollinators are not only enjoyable to observe, they are vital to our human survival. Much attention has been given to the imported honeybee. However, our wild bees are much more efficient in their pollination services and deserve equal, if not more, conservation efforts. If you love to eat, pollinators work hard to provide us with 1/3 of every bite of food that we take. That's incredible. Yet we only have left them 5% of the original wild green space for their habitat needs. So let's just resonate a little bit, only 5%. So we have a lot of work to do. This call to action is beautifully crafted in Douglas Tallamay's book, Bringing Nature Home, which you may have already read. And in it, he states that 83% of land is privately owned in the United States. So we can't leave all the conservation work for the Conservancy to do, or our state and national parks to figure out. Look into your space, outdoor space right now. What meadow or what woodland nature preserve can you actually envision in that space? And maybe you're already doing that, and that's awesome. How can that space be further expanded, or how can you even reach out to your neighbors to support each other in this effort? Many of our yards hold a lot of untapped potential. Another book that I find quite inspiring is Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Rainier and Claudia West. In this, Claudia points out that rewilding rests in the hands of our communities. You don't need a fancy degree to get engaged in this process. Business owners, teachers, students, homeowners, we all have a part of rewilding our piece of the planet. And it really doesn't matter the size, the space that is available to you. I love this picture because I took this last year in my backyard in Lancaster City, and it's Pycnanthemum mutacum, which is a species of mountain mint, and it's in less than a square foot in a little clay pot. And this was around this time last year, a little later in the season, and it, in this moment, was providing nectar to 4 pollinator species. There's a hungry little digger wasp and a snout-nosed butterfly in there, a gray hair-streaked butterfly, and some wild bees. So really, one plant in one pot can even make a difference. All right, so now that we are charged up and ready to go with why we need to rebuild biodiversity, let's explore how to go about even doing this. So what I did is created a very simple 5-step framework of ecological gardening with simple alliteration using the letter E to help in retention for those of us that are very new to this process. As we go through the 5 E's, I invite you to just jot down your own analysis of your space that you're aiming to rewild. That way you're already engaging in the process. So here they are, the 5 E's: empathizing with your client or clients, evaluating your site conditions, designing in ecosystem services. Every season counts when selecting your native plant palette. And to enjoy the process, to keep your endurance, because this is a lifetime of learning and observation. So we'll review each of these and allow time for you to record and reflect for your own space. So before any spade hits the ground, first reflect on who you're designing your backyard habitat for. It could be a cedar waxwing, a redback salamander, maybe a grandchild, yourself. Take all your clients into consideration and literally explore your space through the eyes of that being. This is a great activity to do with kids. I often do this with students, and it's fascinating to hear their reflections from this part of the process. So right now, if you have a writing tool, just jot down briefly, who are your clients in your space? Maybe you already have some visitors. Who are you building your habitat for? For me, cedar waxwings were a must, one of my favorite birds. And I knew that later I was definitely gonna have to have a serviceberry tree in my yard, which it does the trick in definitely attracting cedar waxwings. I also knew I wanted lots of pollinators, and me being a client of my space, I knew I wanted to incorporate some wild edibles into my landscape as well. So I have some high bush blueberry and serviceberry. And the one thing I'm looking to engage is some redback salamanders, because I know they're in Lancaster City, but I don't quite have them in my yard. So I'm being more conscious of providing more rotting logs and rocks in my landscape. So jot down a few clients that you're hoping to support or already supporting. So we need to think about, how will your clients find the key elements of a habitat? Where will they find food, water, cover, and places to raise young? And some of these elements even pertain to humans, as we are part of nature too. And there's this awesome book, if you're particularly interested in engaging young people, Nature Play at Home by Nancy Stranitzky, that provides a framework for best practices in building in nature play to your outdoor space. So definitely check out this book if you're aiming to build empathy for young people's needs in your garden. Then as ecological gardeners, we need to sustain that habitat through environmentally sound practices, which we will briefly review at the end here. So you want to research what host plants are needed to support the moths and butterflies at the base of all food chains. Here we see a monarch bunching on some milkweed and a fritillary on some violets right here in my backyard. This was last year. And these host plants are vital for the survival of Lepidoptera. Additional food sources may come in the form of seeds, fruits, nuts, and nectar and pollen. They provide an array of food through all 4 seasons to support hungry migratory species as well. Here we see some yellow blooming Pachyra aureorea that blooms in the spring, and sea tufts left standing throughout the fall and winter to support wintering over birds. We want to create water access through converting the bottom of possibly a tray of a pot, installing a bird bath, or maybe you're fortunate enough to have a local stream in flying or crawling distance from your space. So these are elements that you want to design in when thinking about supporting wildlife. Cover may be a brush pile of loose debris and twigs. Instead of putting it on the curb, keep that resource to create new opportunities to create safe spaces for wildlife. Reimagining the ground cover layer of your garden to include living mulches instead of wood mulch like this GM Fragoroides on the left, that is just a great place for insects and other things to hide. Rocks and rotting logs also are key for species like salamanders that nest and lay their eggs under them. Bird and bee boxes can be additional support in your designed wildlife habitat space. There's some debate about the problems that bee boxes create in attracting mites and other predators to the wild bee larvae. So using removable paper tubes can help in keeping those spaces clean for wild bees. Host plants, again, are vital for Lepidoptera species. So we can sustain these elements of a habitat that you're going to be incorporating into your space by choosing to compost, putting in the sweat equity rather than using chemical sprays, leaving leaves for wintering over insects that actually disguise themselves as a leaf before they emerge from the leaf litter in the spring. Lawn reduction is also key, given that many lawnmowers don't actually have emissions regulations, causing more air pollution than we would all be comfortable with. Running your lawnmower for an hour is actually comparable to driving your car for hundreds of miles on the road. So lawn reduction is definitely a key part to helping to have ecological gardening practices in your own space. And again, empathize with your human clients too. How will they interact in the space? Where are they most likely to explore and exercise their independence? This schoolyard pollinator garden was situated near a playground here in Lancaster City so that the students could explore on their own during recess instead of placing it far away where teacher supervision would be needed. Okay, so that was the biggest E component of the ecological gardening process and will definitely help refuel you along the rest of the process. When in doubt, always go back to why you are designing this place in the first place. It will recharge you. Next step of the framework is to evaluate your site conditions. Get to know your site intimately. How long the sun rests in an area, how water flows and collects, any existing vegetation that may hint to what may else thrive in that space. So a certain tree may hint to you, okay, this is actually a drier habitat that I need to think about incorporating those plants into the space. You can physically map this out on top of a base map of your space that you can retrieve from like Google Maps, or if you have blueprints available. And in doing so, you will ultimately be able to select the right plants for the right place. Some of you may have heard that phrase, which will be more economical for you in the long run. So again, take a few moments and just record in the paper you have provided, what site conditions are you already aware of? Where are your driest soils? Where is stormwater collecting? How do people circulate in your space? So just take a few moments, and again, 40 minutes, we can't engage in this fully, but you can get started in jogging some ideas down. Here you see a student using different colors to mark water flow and puddling locations. Identifying these microhabitats will help inform the later steps of the ecological gardening process. So I wanted to share a quick story about this step. This is a little wet meadow project that I did at my parents' home I guess it was now 2 years ago in Lidditz. And this space was formerly just mowed grass. The neighbors claimed that all former owners could not successfully grow anything. Anytime anyone would try to grow something here, it would always die. So I thought this was a very fun design challenge. So in observation of more lush grass in this during a drought, it was apparent that a nearby spring was actually welling up in this space, welcoming plants that enjoy their feet being a little bit wet. So now it is thriving. It's only about 200 to 300 square feet, but there's now swamp sunflowers and liatris and monarda didyma, and turtlehead is even in there. And now it's a thriving space to support skipper butterflies, hummingbirds, wild bees, and the occasional snake visitor that I know my mom deeply loves. Okay, on to our next E of ecological gardening, designing in ecosystem services. These are the functions that are naturally part of more wild spaces. We too can learn from them and design them into our spaces. My favorite ecosystem service is provisioning services. For example, those are like edible and medicinal elements that you can actually harvest from your landscape. This is a picture of the moment that my urban backyard produces high bush blueberries, service berries, and red raspberries, all in like a day or two, and it's absolutely glorious and delicious. I love it. So take a moment and briefly reflect. What services does your home landscape currently provide? What edible or medicinal elements could you integrate in your design habitat? Is there an opportunity to capture and filter water from a rooftop or driveway? And we'll go over a few more ecosystem services here in a moment. Just jot down a few ideas. So this image really helps to visualize the other ecosystem services that you can design into your space. So supporting, provisioning, cultural, and regulating. For example, creating a swale along a driveway or rain garden to capture stormwater from a roof helps in providing flood control. It builds biodiversity, pollination services, and can provide even educational opportunities with some signage if it's in a highly visible space. All right, our next E is for choosing native plants in every season. When possible, select local ecotype plants that strengthen the local genetics of your region's plant communities. Some nurseries are better at providing these than others, so ask around when purchasing your plants. Take a moment now to just briefly record what is blooming in your yard in the springtime, what is blooming right now and in the fall. And if you need more of a challenge, what time periods do you see in your garden where there's like a lull in the bloom cycle? What plants could possibly fill that gap? Winter is by far my favorite season to design for, given that it's actually 4 to 5 months of the year. In these colder months where there's not a lot of greenery to look at, leaving seed tufts standing of Monarda and Echinacea and mountain mint and Rudbeckia gives you those textural aesthetics and also provides wild bird food. The nutritional and antioxidant potential of native berry bushes like that from arrowwood viburnum have been proven by ornithologists to be highly desired by migratory and wintering over birds. For 30% of wild bees, the hollow stalks of Joe Pye weed and other pithy plants provide a cavity for nesting. It is vital to plan ahead in selecting your native plant palette so that you have access to the greatest availability. The demand for native plants is growing, thankfully, so planning ahead on ordering seeds and native landscape plugs from your chosen grower will give you the greatest selection. Penn State Extension has a great list of retailers and wholesalers to purchase from that grow plants without neonicotinoids, which is a systemic spray that is unfortunately used fairly common in conventional nurseries that harms the nervous system of insects when they interact with the pollen, nectar, and the leaves of sprayed plants. It also has been attributed to suppressing the appetite of birds when consuming seeds of sprayed plants, really harming their ability to recharge their energy. So just something to keep in mind as we're thinking about purchasing native plants for our landscapes. You can be fancy and track your plant selection using a spreadsheet showing when the plants are in bloom and if there's any gaps, if there's winter interest, and tracking how the plants support wildlife. This may be handy for you if this is the way your brain works. It's not for everybody, but it can really help you visualize your space in this way. And when you get it all right, you get to experience the joy of seeing queen bumblebees emerge from the ground in early spring, seeking the early spring nectar and pollen that are provided in your designed habitat. This incredible image, I just love the vibrancy of it, from the Xerces Society, helps to visualize the need for creating a 4-season plant palette with bunching grasses like prairie dropseed for the queen to nest under in the winter, and a variety of blooms for food from early spring all the way into fall. And when possible, select plants that were propagated from selecting seed from your local ecoregion. Here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, we're in the northern Piedmont. In Lancaster City, we rest in the limestone, dolomite, lowlands, and in southern Lancaster County, the Piedmont uplands. These ecoregions give rise to specific plants that are best adapted for your backyard. And if you'd like to learn more about these maps, they are available online. I love exploring them in different parts of the world. They are provided by the EPA. Just Google ecoregion maps and you can have access to these for free. Some other free resources to explore this are from the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. They provide various plant communities on the resource on the left. That is downloadable online. The Virginia Native Plant Society has a great online booklet for Piedmont plants that I find typically helpful for beginners. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a downloadable book as well. And there's print copies available as well, I think, for a low charge. And also, if you go to the Conservancy's website, on their community wildlife habitat page, you'll see that they have resources that connect you over to the National Wildlife Federation plant databases. So these are all ways that you can explore how to get a native plant palette for every season, all 4 seasons. There are definitely ample resources online to explore native plants and definitely growing in number. And then last but not least, we're going to enjoy the process. So we need to phase out our garden goals because this can be very overwhelming if we have huge swaths of land to work with. We need to start small and experience early success. Grab a camera to record your observations, try your hand at nature journaling, or choose a sit spot to dig deeper into engaging your 5 senses. Take a moment to reflect. What do you currently do to enjoy your gardens and celebrate your success? And what activities would further enhance your observations? For me, it is definitely photography. My favorite activity is to take photos of blooms and bugs because my lens is not good enough to capture distant birds, maybe one day, but I stick to birds and blooms or bugs and blooms. And you can see here in the spring, I like looking from the perspective underneath plants. Here's wild ginger as it emerged and the beautiful flower. And you can kind of see the little ant pollinators coming in and out. And there's some tiarella and some pachyra. Spring is an awesome time after a long depths of winter. And in the summer, there's more insects that come to life. This is just a fun time to see what plants are most delicious and to just make basic observations of what is coming through your space. And in fall, my focus is on seed tufts and just how snow is resting on the tufts of some of these plants. Again, it just offers these irresistible shots of different textures. It's so much fun. So this might not work for you, but there might be other ways that you can engage in your landscape other than just gardening all the time. Figure out ways to celebrate it and make fun observations. And then in closing today, we're gonna hopefully get you inspired to take action yourself. So I thought because we can't physically be with each other and practice some skills, in this last segment, I have a few before and after photos from this past year of building biodiversity in human spaces in hopes to inspire you to take your first action or continued action in your landscape. But before I do that, I just wanted to show you a little bit more of a pragmatic approach to process that I use in ecological gardening if the E's don't resonate in your brain. Here you can see you're just starting with collecting your goals, analyzing your space, designing on graph paper if you had it, trying to get it to scale so you really know how many plants you're going to need, which will help you tremendously and make the work a little lighter. Selecting a plant palette using local ecotypes when possible and thinking about all those 4 seasons, site prepping, choosing a prep method, whether it's sheet mulching or sod removal, planting that space and managing it. And then understanding that really this is a lifelong process. So just observe, reflect, and adapt, and don't think of it as a linear thing. We're always constantly just somewhere on this continuum in this path. So here's just a few photos. I think I have 5 or 6 here. So this project was in a suburban neighborhood, and it was just large swaths of grass, and we chose to use sheet mulch, which is just sheets of cardboard and wood chips on top. And this was done last fall. And you can also see on the bottom, there is a project in the works to create a little mini meadow, which I'm very excited about. We are still debating if we're going to seed it or use landscape plugs. And a lesson learned in this project was that crabgrass and its stoloniferous roots do not get smothered by cardboard and wood chips. So we ended up needing to use a broad fork to remove all those roots in this space. So there's always something to learn. In this case, the clients wanted to support pollinators. That's what their clientele was. And the clients themselves desired a shorter plant matrix. So we chose plants that would not block their view to their backyard. In evaluating the site conditions, we found the space to be very dry and sunny. So we use shorter species like Liatris microcephala, which is a little mini blazing star. Enithera fruticosa, some of you may know that as sundrops. It's a yellow flower that is just now kind of cycling out. And Asclepias tuberosa, which is that bright purple or bright orange milkweed that's in bloom right now, which these species can thrive in dry conditions. All right, next one gives you a visualization of what a planting would look like 7 months later. So the top photo is a landscape in a little bit of a woodland setting, planted last fall, and 7 months later. And you can see within that time, there's a little, my camera again, not the best, but you can see there's a little snowberry clearwing that is sipping nectar from the Phlox divaricata. So very quickly, you know, you're inviting wildlife to your space in a very short amount of time, which is part of the joy of this whole process, that you don't have to wait long to see the effects of your hard work. In this schoolyard habitat planting, it was planted last May, and in a year's time, the growth is quite remarkable. I actually was a little speechless when I went to take this photo the other day. There's actually 8 species in this humble 350 square feet that was once mowed and treated lawn. Within short visits to the space, I've seen hummingbirds and American toad, bumblebees, and monarch caterpillars. This is a great showcase of if you build it, they will come. The students and teachers were key clients in this project. Educational signage for the 8 species provided cultural ecosystem services, allowing for self-guided learning in this outdoor living laboratory. In southern Lancaster County, this was a larger lawn conversion project involving using a sod cutter machine and aerating the compacted soils from previous construction vehicles using a broad fork. The space was planted with close to 1,000 plants with about 20 species, and they were planted densely, as I do, about every 10 to 12 inches. And you can see that there's actually brown mulch in between the plants. And that's just a very temporary tool to help in weed suppression and water retention until the plants interweave and create that nice green matrix over time. So again, you only use the mulch once in my practice that I use, and then I don't use it again. So this is a great way to rethink our lawns and create more green mulch and living mulch instead of brown mulch. All right, and the last photo here, within just a few weeks of planting the front of this new property, the homeowners spotted a spice bush swallowtail caterpillar on the newly planted spice bush. Instead of a front lawn, this couple will now have a 4-season front habitat, providing many ecosystem services. They requested a seasonal spreadsheet tracker as part of their design. So as they add to their landscape, they can be intentional about enhancing their seasonal bloom cycles and wildlife support offered by the native plants that they choose to add into the space. And this is an image I shared on the Waxwing Facebook page back in January of our little habitat here in Lancaster City. When we bought our home, there were lots of wonky ornamental shrubs that attracted lots of spider mites, but very little other wildlife. And after some sweat equity, our front garden now is full of life and it is a joy to observe in all 4 seasons. In closing, just jot down a few things that were meaningful for you this evening and any questions you may have or action steps that you envision taking. And then I believe Kelly will take a few of your questions and reflections, and we will hopefully get to them. If not, feel free to reach out. Here is my contact information. I thank you very much for your time and participation. Please, again, feel free to reach out if you want to collaborate on any project. The Lancaster Conservancy also offers a free home site visit to get you started in rethinking how your space can serve as a habitat. It's an awesome free service. Take advantage of it. So please engage, reach out, take care, and happy ecological gardening adventures. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elise. That was such a unique way to look at changing your landscape and changing your backyard, to view it through the lens and the eyes of who you're designing it for, from the butterflies to the salamanders to grandchildren. I love that advice. That's incredible. I want to give everyone a few moments to ask Elise any questions you might have. You can do that using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. While we wait for you to ask a few questions, I want to let you know about our upcoming nature hours. On Wednesday, July 15th, we have Controlling Spotted Lanternfly presented by the Lancaster County Conservation District. A very interesting topic, which I know is becoming more and more apparent to all of us as we watch people in the nymphs currently right now growing in our neighborhoods and in our cities. On July 29th, we will have Nature's Medicine, Healing Yourself and the Earth with Native Plants, presented by Megan Gonick from Generative Health. We hope you will join us for both of those presentations. And then, as Fritz said at the beginning of this presentation, Lancaster Water Week is coming soon. Keep an eye on your email and on our social media at Lancaster Conservancy to see our upcoming events, as well as the new Lancaster Water Week pledge. We're really looking forward to continuing on with our 4th year of Lancaster Water Week. So now let's see here. I want to see if we have a few questions for Elise. Alyssa wants to know if you have that spreadsheet available that had the wonderful bloom, color, and schedule on it, where people can find that, or if they can create their own.
Okay. Yeah, that's just something I created actually for a project that I did when I was studying at Mount Cuba, and it's a service that I offered as part of my business, but I think it's definitely recreatable, just thinking about the common name, scientific name, and then doing the research to figure out where the bloom cycles are. And I think actually creating it from scratch helps you better understand your plants, but feel free to reach out if you need any guidance on doing that.
Wonderful.
But I think it's definitely a fun tool for folks whose brains work in that way.
Definitely. Melissa wants to know, how should we control invasive pests such as Japanese beetles without harming other plants and pollinator residents in our gardens?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm a big fan of just manual removal of things, and also keeping in mind that really when you create a nice vibrant ecosystem in your yard, some of those things that seem to be kind of harmful or predaceous will become food for a hungry bird or something. So I tend to err on the side of caution to use anything that's destructive. And if it's really a nuisance, just being patient and waiting to see if maybe something will come and snatch it after all. But if you must, definitely use manual practices, maybe I guess old wives' tale, just using soapy water, a bucket of soapy water and picking them off, which is a lot of time, but usually sprays are not going to be targeted for one insect. So unfortunately, you're not going to be able to, get rid of one. You're going to end up harming others.
Very true. Evan would like to know, do you have any favorite native plant nurseries here in Lancaster that you favorite?
Well, I have the joy of being, because I'm a business, I can get wholesale access. So the one wholesaler I absolutely love is Kind Earth Growers. I just started using them this year for my clients. They do a lot better with sourcing local ecotypes. They're not 100%, but they're just really easy people to work with. But there's plenty of other small mom and pop businesses. And like I mentioned earlier, I believe it's available online. It might be available on the Conservancy website. I have to check. But there is a list produced by the Penn State Extension of retail nurseries, wholesalers, and then like specific nature events, which, you know, unfortunately with COVID, we don't have that right now, but they are all listed, and I believe they are all neonicotinoid free nurseries. So that's an added bonus. You don't even have to do the research. They already have done that for you. So I encourage you to Google that, find that Penn State Extension, and there's plenty within, I would say, a good 45-minute driving distance from Lancaster.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll make sure to add that resource as well so everyone can have that. Julie would like to know, first she'd like to thank you very much, Elise, for the presentation. And then she'd like to know if you have any advice on getting rid of invasive plants such as mile a minute and knotweed.
Again, a lot of sweat equity. It's very tempting to use sprays, but again, I'm not a purist with this, but I guess my philosophy with doing all this, we put all this hard work into supporting wildlife, and then we try to do a quick little fix. And I guess my concern is if we all look for the quick little fix, that we're going to be doing more harm than good. So again, just physically getting out there and just pulling it out. And there's plenty of examples. I know even some folks that volunteer with the Conservancy of awesome efforts in manually removing invasive plants and preserves, and just seeing the bounty of native plants that emerge. They're not even seeded in, it's just in there in the seed bank naturally. And I just find that to be so encouraging, just to see that a little bit of work can really help bounce back some of that native flora in our woodlands.
Lisa would love to know if you have any specific advice on invasives such as ivy or mulberry, which can expand so quickly into native plantings.
Yeah, unfortunately, smothering doesn't work for that. I definitely take a broad fork. I have this like really intense 7-tine broad fork, this steel thing made locally by Amish. And I just use that to dig up the roots. Same thing with mulberry. Yeah, that one's definitely, you have to get really down deep. The other, I mean, I guess with mulberries, unfortunately, you know, they strengthen the root system if you do this, but you can also mimic herbivory. So you can just like snip at the bottom of the tree so it doesn't fully develop. Sometimes that will encourage a stronger root system, but it is, if you keep at it, eventually it will deplete its stores. So you just kind of mimic being an herbivore and use your pruners to cut back that vegetation.
Elise, what would you recommend as a great resource list for which flowers and plants attract which wildlife and pollinator species?
Yeah, I think Penn State Extension has one particularly for the correlation between moths and butterflies and their host plants that I refer to occasionally. I know Heather Holm has some great books, particularly on bees and supporting wild bees and what particular species and subspecies of bees are attracted to which plants. So Heather Holm, I have 2 of her books. I'm looking over at my bookshelf. There's another one, Butterflies of Pennsylvania, and I believe that includes also some of their host plants, if I'm recalling correctly. And there's another one, Life Cycles of Butterflies. Yeah, it's more of a kid's book, but it shows the life cycle of a butterfly, and then it highlights a few key plants that you can incorporate as host plants for those plants. But I know just from observation, put in mountain mint and you'll get something.
That's great. we have a question from Julie about container gardens. Can you talk about your approach to how you garden in containers versus in a lawn?
Yeah, I honestly don't have as much experience working in containers, but I think something to keep in mind is selecting plants that could probably handle being in a little more arid conditions. Like, for example, the mountain mint that I mentioned, it's pretty hardy. It can handle a kind of a wide range of conditions. So even when that pot dries out, it's still fairly vibrant. But you can also do shade gardens and start using like heucheras and different, shade loving plants. I know some of my inspiration in doing that came from Mount Cuba and just observing in Delaware. If you're not familiar with Mount Cuba, it's a great place to just go observe natural gardens. And I believe they reopened the mid of June. So they can give you, they actually put little identifiers on the plants in their pots to give you just kind of inspiration in getting started. But I don't have a particular text in mind that's really good at that or any online guide. But I would just say, plants that naturally are not going to need, very specific site conditions. That may not answer the question, I'm sorry. But I think that's definitely untapped potential. If someone's an author, I think there's potential there in niche market for sure.
Definitely. We have a question about Cedar Waxwings, and someone had heard, Anne here had heard that Nandia berries were a problem for them, and she was just concerned, since it's very commonly used in landscapes, if you had any thoughts on that plant specifically.
Yeah, unfortunately it seems to be widely used. I think it's because it keeps like a red berry and its foliage in the winter. I personally don't understand the affinity towards the plant when we have beautiful things like winterberry and chokeberry. They're stunningly beautiful alternatives. So I don't know, other than maybe it is what landscapers see or homeowners see in conventional nurseries. And so it's just what's available in the trade. So a lot of trying to move this forward for more folks to be engaged, I think, is just at some point in time engaging our big box chain plant providers, because that's where a lot of people go. So there's definitely room to grow in this, because you're absolutely right. Nandina is a nightmare for particular berry loving birds like cedar waxwings.
It's very true. Lots of change will have to happen there.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to address a few questions we had before I pass it back over to Fritz. And thank you again, Elise. A recording of this Nature Hour will be made available, and we'll be sure to send it to everyone who registered for Nature Hour. So you'll be able to go back through and watch the resources that Elise provided again, and go back through those great questions she provided. We will also just make sure that it gets emailed out to everyone as well the next days here. So keep an eye out for that. And if anyone has any questions specifically for Elise, we'll be sure to provide a link to her company page so that you can reach out if you're interested in her services as well, as I know it looks like a few of you are here in the questions. And she'll be able to get back to you with specific answers around her services. So thank you again so much, Elise. I want to pass it over to Fritz for some final thoughts and comments here before we close out our third Nature Hour.
Thanks, Kelly. And I'm going to go back to the beginning of Elise's presentation when she asked the question, how to rebuild biodiversity in your home landscape. She mentioned creating mini nature preserves for a diverse food web. And while we recognize we are losing birds, bees, and butterflies at an alarming rate, the beauty of what Elise has shared is that we can all make simple changes on our properties that will have an immediate impact. And this should feel very empowering to each of us. Elise mentioned the Conservancy's Community Wildlife Habitat Initiative and our super volunteer, Linda Farrick, who is available to advise you for free about the plants in your landscape. What is non-native? What is invasive and should be removed right away? And what is native that we should encourage more of in your landscape are questions that she can help answer. You can learn more about the Community Wildlife Habitat Initiative at our website, and Kelly added it to the chat box as well. You can also continue to engage Elise as a consultant designer and installer, and she obviously does an incredible job and has done so for a number of local properties and projects. And while the Conservancy works in large landscapes and nature preserves, this is the work of the rest of us. This is our sweat equity for our planet and for our local ecosystems. Elise, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing all of you in your yards, on our preserves, and back here in 2 weeks from tonight when we host the Lancaster Conservation District to learn all about the challenges of the highly invasive plant hopper, the spotted lantern fly. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.